Episode 1:0 Changes to the 3 Degrees of Glory Doctrine. The 3 Degrees of Glory Doctrine, as outlined in Doctrine and Covenants 76, is a core LDS teaching today, but early church leaders described it quite differently than how modern Mormons understand it. Over time, definitions shifted, contradictions emerged, and key details were altered or downplayed. The concept of the 3 Degrees of Glory in Latter-day Saint LDS theology stems from a claimed vision experienced by Joseph Smith and Sidney Rigdon in February 1832, recorded in Doctrine and Covenants section 76. According to their account, the afterlife is divided into 3 distinct kingdoms or degrees of glory: the celestial kingdom, the highest realm for those who fully accepted the gospel and lived faithfully; the terrestrial kingdom, for honorable individuals who did not fully embrace the gospel in mortality; and the telestial kingdom, reserved for the unrepentantly sinful. Yet even these souls still receive a measure of divine glory. Only a small group labeled the sons of perdition are said to be eternally damned. This tiered model of the afterlife marked a sharp departure from mainstream Christian teachings of the time, which typically framed judgment in binary terms: heaven or hell. The idea that nearly everyone would be saved to some degree reflects a universalist influence, likely inherited from Joseph Smith's father, Joseph Smith Sr., who was a Universalist and rejected the idea of eternal damnation. The resemblance between Smith's theology and his father's religious views suggests the possibility that these ideas were less divinely revealed and more culturally inherited. Notably, this 1832 vision makes no mention of temple rituals, eternal marriage, or exaltation to godhood, concepts that would only appear later in Smith's evolving doctrine. At this stage, the theology appears far more inclusive, even optimistic, offering a salvation plan that contradicts the harshness of traditional Christian eschatology, but one that rests entirely on the unverifiable claims of a supposed vision. Early on, Joseph Smith suggested that baptism wasn't an absolute barrier to entering the celestial kingdom. He indicated that those who rejected baptism during their mortal life could still accept it in the afterlife. This view implies a kind of post-mortal opportunity for salvation, emphasizing mercy and continued progress. Unlike the later LDS teaching that once a person is assigned to a kingdom after judgment, that assignment is final and eternal, the early 1830s teachings sometimes presented the telestial kingdom as a temporary, probationary state. Souls in the telestial kingdom could eventually progress upward, moving into higher degrees of glory, as we will see under Young, evolving to justify polygamy and exaltation. By the time Joseph Smith reached the Nauvoo period, his original vision of celestial glory had transformed into something far more exclusive. He now taught that only those who entered into the secretive and controversial practice of polygamy could attain the highest level of exaltation. This marked a stark departure from the more inclusive tone of the 1832 vision in D&C 76, which made no mention of polygamy, eternal families, or human deification. Between 1842 and 1844, Smith introduced radical new doctrines, including eternal progression, the sealing of families, and the idea that the faithful could become gods. These teachings emerged late in his ministry, when his power was at its peak and public scrutiny was intensifying. Far from a consistent prophetic vision, this doctrinal shift suggests a calculated overhaul that reinforced Smith's authority, justified his plural marriages, and elevated his role from prophet to future god. While publicly denying it, Smith was secretly marrying dozens of women in Nauvoo, including already married women and teenage girls. In 1843, he dictated D&C 132, which declared that plural marriage was not only divinely sanctioned but required for the highest exaltation. Yet this explosive revelation was withheld during his lifetime. Church leaders continued to deny the practice even as it expanded behind the scenes, only publicly releasing D&C 132 in 1852, 8 years after Smith's death. The secrecy, contradictions, and posthumous rollout of the revelation suggest a movement shaped less by divine mandate than by manipulation and personal ambition. Brigham Young's radical changes, 1850s to 1870s. Brigham Young dramatically reshaped the afterlife narrative laid out in Joseph Smith's 1832 vision, D&C 76. He redefined the terrestrial kingdom, not as a realm for honorable non-Mormons as originally described, but as the eternal home of apostate Latter-day Saints. This was a clear distortion of the original doctrine and reflected his growing obsession with loyalty and control. Young also floated the idea that souls in lower kingdoms could eventually progress to higher ones, a teaching directly at odds with later LDS leaders like Joseph Fielding Smith, who declared, "It is wrong to say that those who enter the telestial or terrestrial kingdom may eventually work their way to the celestial." Doctrines of Salvation, Vol. 2, p. 31. Even more controversial was Young's infamous Adam-God doctrine, first taught in the Salt Lake Tabernacle on April 9, 1852. He proclaimed, "When our father Adam came into the Garden of Eden, he came into it with a celestial body. He is our Father and our God, and the only God with whom we have to do." Journal of Discourses, Vol. 1, p. 50. This doctrine placed progression within the celestial kingdom itself on the condition of accepting Adam as God, further fragmenting the theology laid out by Smith. After Smith's death, Brigham Young aggressively elevated polygamy from a private practice to a public doctrine. In the same 1852 sermon in which he revealed D&C 132, he declared that plural marriage was a law of God, never to be revoked. Deseret News, September 14, 1852. He warned that eternal exaltation was impossible without it, stating, "The only men who become gods, even the sons of God, are those who enter into polygamy." Journal of Discourses, Vol. 11, p. 269, August 19, 1866. Despite occasional assurances that monogamous Mormons could still enter the celestial kingdom, Young never wavered in asserting that only polygamists would attain godhood. His teachings turned the path to exaltation into a theological ladder, where the top rungs were reserved for those willing to comply with and defend plural marriage, no matter the moral, legal, or doctrinal contradictions. Late 1800s, early 1900s, hardening boundaries. By the early 20th century, LDS theology underwent a deliberate consolidation under Joseph F. Smith and Apostle James E. Talmage, who worked to shut down earlier speculative teachings, especially Brigham Young's hints at progression between kingdoms. Under their leadership, the doctrine hardened. Joseph F. Smith, in the Improvement Era and General Conference talks, rejected the idea of postmortal progression between kingdoms. James E. Talmage then canonized that rigidity in his influential 1899 book, The Articles of Faith, where he declared, "There is no provision made for advancement from grade to grade within the three kingdoms." 1899 ed. p. 420. This statement drew a hard line, permanently closing theological doors Young had left ajar. Talmage also reframed exaltation as being contingent upon temple ordinances, rituals that had absolutely no place in the 1832 vision of the 3 degrees of glory, D&C 76. That original revelation makes no mention of temples, sealing powers, priesthood endowments, or polygamy. By retrofitting these requirements onto earlier scripture, Smith's successors effectively rewrote the path to salvation, substituting the sweeping universalism of early Mormonism with a rigid, institutionalized hierarchy of worthiness, one that increasingly revolved around temple obedience and church control. Modern LDS doctrine versus early teachings. Celestial Kingdom, originally portrayed in the 1832 vision, D&C 76, as widely accessible to all who accepted Christ. Even after death, the Celestial Kingdom was later restricted to baptized Latter-day Saints who completed temple ordinances. Over time, this once-inclusive doctrine shifted to a more exclusive system tied to institutional obedience and ritual participation. Terrestrial Kingdom. D&C 76 described the terrestrial kingdom as a reward for honorable non-Mormon believers who rejected the gospel in mortality but accepted it afterward. However, Brigham Young and later leaders increasingly characterized it as a punishment for apostate or half-hearted saints, subtly reframing the vision to reinforce institutional discipline. Celestial Kingdom. While early saints speculated about progression between kingdoms, that idea was later formally rejected. In the Articles of Faith, 1899, James E. Talmage wrote, "There is no provision made for advancement from grade to grade within the three kingdoms," p. 420, closing the door on eternal progression across glories. The doctrine of the 3 degrees of glory has undergone systematic overhaul, reshaped, redefined, and increasingly restricted to serve institutional control. What began as Joseph Smith's sweeping vision of near-universal salvation was fractured by contradictions from Brigham Young and later theologians like James Talmage. The result? A once-inclusive afterlife repackaged into a rigid, temple-centered hierarchy where salvation is no longer about grace, but about obedience, ordinances, and loyalty to the church. If you found this episode thought-provoking, hit that like button and make sure to subscribe and follow so you never miss what's coming next. Thank you so kindly for watching. This is the Ex-Mormon Informant signing off for today.